3 days after my husband was buried, my son looked me straight in the eye and said, "Dad's gone, Mom. That means everything belongs to us now." My daughter-in-law Vanessa didn't even flinch. She simply slid a folder across the dining table and added, "The sooner we settle this, the easier it will be for everyone." I said nothing. I just stared at the folder. Then I looked at my son, the same boy I had carried through fevers, the same boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, the same boy whose college tuition his father and I had paid by working overtime for years. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That hurt more than the words. I left the table without a single argument. The next morning, I went somewhere they never expected. But I'll come back to that. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and tell me what city you're watching from. I'd love to know how far my story travels. 3 days earlier, we had buried my husband, Robert Dawson. 47 years. That was how long we had been married. 47 years of shared breakfasts, mortgage payments, family vacations, arguments that never lasted long, and quiet evenings spent watching the sunset from our back porch. And now he was gone. The house felt different without him. Not quieter. Hollow. The grandfather clock in the hallway still ticked every second, but each sound felt louder somehow. The living room still held Robert's favorite leather chair. His reading glasses still rested on the side table. His coffee mug was still sitting beside the sink because I couldn't bring myself to wash it. Everything looked the same. Nothing felt the same. The funeral had been beautiful. At least that was what everyone kept telling me. Friends from church came. Neighbors brought casseroles. Former co-workers shared stories. People hugged me and said all the things people always say. He's in a better place. He lived a wonderful life. You were lucky to have each other. I nodded politely. But when the last guest left and the front door closed, all I could hear was silence. A silence so heavy it felt physical. The first 2 days passed in a blur. I barely slept. I barely ate. I spent hours wandering through rooms, filled with memories. Every corner of the house reminded me of Robert. The kitchen where we danced while cooking dinner. The garage where he spent weekends fixing things that didn't need fixing. The porch swing where we planned our retirement. Then something began to change. At first, it was small. So small that I told myself I was imagining it. Ethan stopped asking how I was feeling. Instead, he started asking practical questions. Questions about insurance. Questions about bank accounts. Questions about property taxes. Questions about deeds. I convinced myself he was trying to help. After all, grief affects everyone differently. Maybe this was how he coped. Maybe focusing on paperwork was easier than facing loss. But then Vanessa started appearing everywhere. She walked through rooms carrying a notepad, measuring walls, taking photos, making lists. One afternoon, I found her standing in my bedroom. My bedroom. The room Robert and I had shared for nearly 5 decades. She was staring at the windows. "What are you doing?" I asked. She smiled. "Oh, nothing. Just thinking about renovation possibilities." Renovation possibilities. The words settled into my stomach like cold stones. I laughed nervously. Why would anyone renovate my bedroom? Her smile never changed. Just thinking ahead. Thinking ahead. That phrase followed me everywhere. At dinner. During phone calls. While sorting funeral flowers. Always thinking ahead. Never talking about Robert. Never talking about grief. Only the future. A future that seemed to have no place for me. The third night after the funeral, Ethan asked me to join them for dinner. Something in his voice sounded rehearsed. When I entered the dining room, the table looked strangely formal. 3 chairs, 3 place settings, and a thick folder resting in front of Vanessa. The moment I saw it, my stomach tightened. Nobody spoke while we ate. The silence felt deliberate, manufactured, like they were waiting for the right moment. Finally, Vanessa placed her fork down. The sound echoed through the room. She pushed the folder toward Ethan. Ethan pushed it toward me. Neither one looked comfortable. That should have warned me. "Mom," Ethan began, then stopped. Vanessa took over. "We need to discuss the future." The future? Again. I glanced at the folder. The words property transfer request were visible across the top page. My pulse quickened. "What future?" I asked quietly. Vanessa folded her hands. "The practical future." I looked at Ethan. He finally raised his eyes. For just a second. Then he delivered the sentence that shattered whatever remained of my heart. "Dad's gone, Mom." He swallowed. "That means everything belongs to us now." The room went completely silent. I felt the air leave my lungs. Not because of the money. Not because of the house. Because in that moment, I realized something terrifying. My husband hadn't been gone for 3 days, and already my family was acting as if I had disappeared too. Then Vanessa opened the folder, and what I saw on the first page made my blood run cold. I barely remember leaving the dining room that night. The folder remained on the table. Vanessa kept talking. Ethan kept staring at the papers. I walked upstairs without hearing another word. My legs felt weak. Not from age. From disbelief. For 47 years, Robert and I had built a life together. 3 days after his funeral, our son was already discussing ownership. I closed the bedroom door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed. The bed suddenly felt too large. Too empty. Robert's side remained untouched. His favorite book still rested on the nightstand. A bookmark was tucked between pages 112 and 113. He would never finish it. That realization hit harder than anything Ethan had said downstairs. I reached for one of Robert's sweaters hanging on the closet door. The scent had already started fading. I pressed the fabric against my face and closed my eyes. For a moment, I could almost pretend he was still here. Almost. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. That wasn't unusual. Robert had always been an early riser. For decades, I woke up to the sound of coffee brewing downstairs. Now there was only silence. I made breakfast anyway. 2 eggs, toast, coffee. Halfway through preparing it, I realized I had made enough for 2 people. Old habits don't disappear overnight. I stood at the kitchen counter staring at the second plate. Then I quietly put it away. No tears came. The tears seemed exhausted. Around 9 o'clock, I heard voices in the living room. Vanessa was talking on the phone. I wasn't trying to listen, but some words were impossible to ignore. Open concept. Property value. Future resale. I froze. Property value. Resale. Not home. Not family. Not memories. Just numbers. I walked into the living room. The conversation stopped immediately. Vanessa smiled. The kind of smile people wear when they've been caught doing something they shouldn't. Good morning, Margaret. Margaret. Not Mom. Not even Mrs. Dawson. Just Margaret. As if I were a neighbor. As if I didn't belong here. Who were you talking to? I asked. Oh, nobody important. Nobody important. That answer told me everything. A few hours later, I noticed something else. One of Robert's photographs had disappeared from the hallway. The frame had been there for years. It showed him holding Ethan after his Little League championship game. One of his favorite pictures. I searched the downstairs rooms. Finally, I found it leaning against a wall inside a storage closet. Face turned inward. Hidden. I stood there holding the frame for a long time. Then I carefully carried it back to its place. That afternoon, Ethan arrived home from work. For a brief second, I saw the little boy he used to be. The boy who used to run into my arms after school. The boy who cried when his goldfish died. The boy who once told me I was his best friend. Then Vanessa walked into the room. The expression vanished. He became distant again. Guarded. Like someone following instructions. At dinner, the atmosphere felt strange. Every conversation stopped when I entered the room. Every topic changed when I sat down. I noticed looks passing between them. Quick looks. Silent looks. The kind people exchange when they share a secret. Finally, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Is there something you two want to tell me? Vanessa looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at his plate. No. The answer came too quickly. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I went downstairs for a glass of water. As I passed the study, I noticed light under the door. Voices. Vanessa was speaking. She'll have to leave eventually. I stopped walking. My heart started pounding. Then Ethan answered. His voice was lower. I couldn't hear everything. Only fragments. Best for everyone. Too much house. Can't maintain it. I stood frozen in the hallway. Listening. Not because I wanted to. Because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They weren't discussing whether I should leave. They were discussing when. The next morning, I found another change. The lock on the basement door had been replaced. I stared at it for several seconds. The old brass lock was gone. A new electronic keypad had taken its place. The basement had always been Robert's workspace. Family records, financial files, tax documents. Everything important was down there. I walked into the kitchen. When did the lock get changed? Vanessa didn't even look up from her phone. Yesterday. Why? She shrugged. Security. Security. The answer made no sense. Nothing had ever been locked in this house. Not in 47 years. I turned toward Ethan. Surely he would understand why this bothered me. Surely he would explain. Instead, he said something that chilled me to the bone. Don't worry about it, Mom. Don't worry about it. The same sentence people use when they don't want you asking questions. The same sentence people use when decisions have already been made. That afternoon, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. A well-dressed man stepped out carrying a leather portfolio. I had never seen him before. Vanessa greeted him at the front door. Then she invited him inside. Neither of them acknowledged me. The man spent nearly an hour walking through the house, taking notes, measuring rooms, photographing walls. My stomach tightened with every step he took. Finally, I approached him. "Excuse me, sir. May I ask who you are?" The man looked surprised, then confused, then embarrassed. He glanced toward Vanessa, then back at me, and he asked a question that made my blood run cold. "Oh, I'm sorry." He hesitated. I thought everyone already knew. "Knew what?" I asked. He shifted, uncomfortably. Then he said the words that would keep me awake for the next 3 nights. "I'm the real estate agent." And suddenly, everything started making sense. The words echoed in my mind long after the real estate agent left. I'm the real estate agent, not a contractor, not an insurance adjuster, not someone helping with paperwork after Robert's death. A real estate agent, someone hired to sell houses. My house, the house Robert and I had spent 47 years paying for. The house where Ethan took his first steps. The house where every Christmas morning had unfolded. The house where my husband had taken his last breath. And somehow, people were walking through it, taking measurements, discussing resale value, and making plans. Without me. That night, I sat alone on the back porch. The porch swing creaked softly beneath me. Robert and I used to sit there every evening during summer. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. After enough years together, silence becomes its own language. I found myself staring at the empty side of the swing, still expecting him to be there, still forgetting he wasn't. The grief was hard enough, but something else had begun replacing it. Suspicion. For the first time, I started asking myself a question I never thought I'd ask. How long had this been going on? The next morning, I began noticing things I had ignored before. Small things. Little moments that didn't seem important at the time. Now they looked different. Now they looked connected. A few months before Robert passed away, Ethan had suddenly become interested in our finances. At the time, I thought he was simply being responsible. He had offered to help organize things. Robert had laughed and said we weren't that old yet. Everyone smiled. The conversation moved on. But now I remembered the look Vanessa had given Ethan afterward. A look that lasted only a second. A look I hadn't understood then. Another memory surfaced. 6 months earlier, Vanessa had asked an unusual question during dinner. Have you two ever thought about downsizing? Robert immediately answered. No. Simple. Direct. Final. Vanessa didn't argue, but I remembered the disappointment on her face. At the time, it seemed harmless. Now it didn't. The memories kept coming, one after another, like puzzle pieces finally finding their places. I remembered Ethan insisting on helping Robert with online banking. I remembered Vanessa asking detailed questions about the deed. I remembered finding documents on the kitchen counter that disappeared before I could read them. At the time, grief hadn't clouded my judgment. Trust had. I trusted my family. I never imagined I would need to watch them. That afternoon, another memory returned. One that made my stomach tighten. About 8 months earlier, I had entered the kitchen unexpectedly. Vanessa had been speaking with someone on speakerphone. The moment she saw me, she ended the call. Immediately, almost nervously. I remember joking about it. Sounds secretive. She laughed. Too quickly. Just talking about work. Back then, I accepted the answer. Now I wasn't so sure. That evening, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I checked the mail myself. Usually Ethan brought it in. Usually I never paid attention. Among the envelopes was a statement from our bank. Nothing unusual about that. Except it wasn't addressed to both Robert and me. Only Robert. That seemed strange. After dinner, I quietly carried the envelope upstairs. I wasn't trying to spy. I was trying to understand. Inside was information about an account I barely recognized. An account Robert rarely discussed. The balance wasn't what caught my attention. A recent transaction did. A transfer request. Not completed. Not approved. Requested. I stared at the page. The amount was significant. Far larger than any normal household expense. My hands began trembling. Then I saw something else. The request date. 3 weeks before Robert died. My heartbeat quickened. Why would anyone request that amount? And more importantly, who requested it? The answer wasn't listed. Not directly, but but there was a reference number, a department code, and a handwritten note in the margin. Someone had written, "Client inquiry received through family representative." Family representative. I read those words 3 times, then 4, then 5. I already knew who that family representative was. The next morning, I called the bank. The woman who answered was polite, very polite, but she wouldn't give me details over the phone. Privacy rules, verification requirements, procedures. I understood. Still, one sentence stood out. Before ending the call, she said, "Mrs. Dawson, you may want to review all recent account activity." May want to review. Not should. Not need to. May want to. The careful wording only increased my concern. For the rest of the day, I watched Ethan and Vanessa differently. Not with anger. Not yet. With attention. For the first time, I stopped seeing my son as the little boy I raised. I started seeing him as an adult making choices. Choices he might someday have to explain. That evening, the 3 of us sat down for dinner. Vanessa spent most of the meal on her phone. Ethan barely spoke. The silence felt heavier every day. Then something happened. A text message appeared on Vanessa's screen. Only for a second. She quickly turned the phone away. But not before I saw a few words. Just a few. Enough. Listing timeline. Listing. Not renovation. Not planning. Listing. Real estate language. Selling language. My appetite disappeared instantly. A few minutes later, Vanessa left the room. Her phone remained on the table. Only for a moment. Only a few seconds. But long enough for me to see the name at the top of the most recent conversation. It wasn't a friend. It wasn't family. It was the same real estate company that had sent the agent to my house. And suddenly I understood something terrifying. The agent's visit wasn't the beginning. It was only one step in a plan that had already been underway for months. Then, later that night, while taking out the trash, I found something that confirmed my worst fears. A crumpled document buried beneath coffee grounds and paper towels. I pulled it out, smoothed the paper flat, and froze. At the bottom of the page was a signature line. Above it was a name. My son's name. Ethan Dawson. I stood alone in the kitchen holding the crumpled document. My son's name stared back at me from the signature line. Ethan Dawson. For a long moment, I simply looked at it. The kitchen felt unusually quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Outside, a lawn sprinkler clicked rhythmically across a neighbor's yard. Ordinary sounds. An ordinary evening. Yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. I carefully unfolded the rest of the document. The page wasn't complete. Part of it had been torn away. Coffee stains covered several lines. But there was enough left to understand what I was looking at. Property consultation paperwork. Not final documents. Not a completed sale. But evidence. Evidence that conversations had been happening behind my back. Long before that real estate agent arrived. Long before Robert's funeral. I folded the paper and slipped it into my sweater pocket. Then I sat at the kitchen table where Robert and I had shared thousands of meals. Suddenly, another memory surfaced. A memory I had ignored at the time. 2 months before Robert passed away, he had asked me an unusual question. "Margaret, if anything ever feels wrong, promise me you'll pay attention." At the time I laughed. I thought he was talking about my health. Maybe forgetting medications. Maybe living alone. I never asked what he meant. Now I wished I had. The next morning, I found myself walking through the house differently. Every room seemed filled with clues. Robert's study, the hallway, the basement door with its new lock, even the garage. Places I had passed every day without a second thought. Now I noticed everything. The strange part wasn't what I found. The strange part was what I remembered. Robert had become quieter during the last year of his life. Not sad, not withdrawn, just observant. Sometimes I would catch him watching Ethan and Vanessa during family dinners. Not speaking, simply watching. Back then, I assumed he was tired. Now I wondered if he had seen something I hadn't. One afternoon last fall came rushing back to me. Vanessa was talking about moving. Not herself. Us. She kept mentioning retirement communities. Smaller homes. Assisted living options. At the time, Robert interrupted her. Firmly. "We're staying right here." The room became awkward. Vanessa smiled. But her eyes didn't. I remembered that clearly now. Some smiles never reach the eyes. Later that same day, Robert had spent nearly an hour alone in his study. When he finally came downstairs, he looked thoughtful, concerned. I asked what was wrong. He kissed my forehead and said everything was fine. It was one of the few times during our marriage that I knew he wasn't telling me the whole truth. And yet I never pushed. After 47 years together, you learn to trust. Sometimes too much. That afternoon, I decided to visit the attic. Robert stored old family boxes there. Tax records, photo albums, letters, documents, things we rarely touched. Dust covered everything. Sunlight filtered through the small attic window. The air smelled like cardboard in time. I spent nearly 2 hours sorting through boxes. Most contained exactly what I expected. Old Christmas decorations, school projects Ethan made as a child, vacation photographs, memories, nothing more. Then I found a box I didn't recognize. It sat behind several larger containers. Almost hidden. Not completely. Just enough. The lid wasn't sealed. Inside were dozens of folders. Most were labeled in Robert's handwriting. Insurance, taxes, investments, wills. The word made me stop. Wills. Plural. Not will. Wills. My pulse quickened. I opened the folder. Several versions were inside. Different dates. Different revisions. Some were years old. Others were recent. Very recent. I sat down on the attic floor. Dust covered my clothing. I didn't care. Page after page revealed how carefully Robert had planned for our future. Everything looked normal. Everything looked responsible. Everything looked exactly like the man I had spent my life with. Then I reached the most recent revision. The date caught my attention immediately. It had been updated less than 3 months before Robert died. 3 months. That wasn't long. Not long at all. I continued reading. Most of the language was legal and complicated. But one handwritten note, clipped to the front, changed everything. The note wasn't intended for a lawyer. It wasn't intended for a bank. It was addressed directly to me. My hand started shaking before I even finished the first sentence. Margaret, if you're reading this, it means I was right to be concerned. I read the line. Twice. Then 3 times. The attic suddenly felt colder. Concerned. Concerned about what? About whom? I kept reading. The note wasn't long. Only a few paragraphs. But every sentence felt heavier than the last. Robert wrote that certain conversations had worried him. Certain questions. Certain requests. Certain pressures regarding money and property. He never mentioned names directly. Not once. But he didn't have to. I already knew. Every memory from the past year suddenly looked different. Every strange question. Every uncomfortable dinner. Every conversation about downsizing. Every discussion about finances. It all pointed in the same direction. I felt sick. Not because of the money. Because of the betrayal. The people Robert worried about weren't strangers. They were family. Our family. Before leaving the attic, I searched through the box one final time. At the very bottom was a small envelope. Unlike the others, it wasn't addressed to me. It carried only a single name. Michael Reed. I had never heard that name before. Attached to the envelope was a handwritten message from Robert. Just 6 words. 6 simple words that instantly changed everything. Trust him before you trust anyone. I stared at the sentence. Again and again. Then I turned the envelope over. On the back was a phone number. And beneath it, one final note. If something feels wrong, call him immediately. For the first time since Robert's funeral, I felt something stronger than grief. Purpose. The next morning, I picked up the phone and dialed the number. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table for nearly 20 minutes before dialing the number. I stared at the slip of paper Robert had left behind. Michael Reed. The name meant nothing to me. Yet Robert had trusted him enough to write a warning in his own handwriting. Trust him before you trust anyone. Those words kept replaying in my mind. Finally, I picked up the phone. The call connected after only 2 rings. Law offices of Michael Reed. My throat tightened. For a moment, I almost hung up. Then I introduced myself. There was silence. Not awkward silence. Surprised silence. Then the receptionist asked me to hold. Less than 30 seconds later, a man came on the line. Mrs. Dawson? Yes. His voice immediately changed. Professional. Careful. Almost relieved. I've been hoping you would call. The sentence sent a chill through me. Hoping I would call. Why? Michael asked if we could meet in person. That afternoon. Not next week. Not when convenient. That afternoon. His urgency made me uneasy. But it also confirmed something important. Robert's concerns had been real. A few hours later, I drove across town. The law office sat in a quiet brick building near downtown. Nothing fancy. Nothing dramatic. Just a professional office tucked between a bank and an insurance agency. Michael Reed greeted me personally. He looked to be in his early 60s. Gray hair. Sharp suit. Kind eyes. The kind of man who listened more than he spoke. He led me into a private conference room. For several moments, neither of us said anything. Then he reached into a file cabinet and placed a folder on the table. I recognized Robert's handwriting immediately. Seeing it almost broke me. I hadn't realized how much I missed the simple sight of his writing. Michael waited patiently. Finally, he spoke. "Your husband loved you very much, Mrs. Dawson." I looked away. My eyes suddenly burned. "I know." Michael nodded. "He spent the last year making sure you would be protected." Protected? The word landed heavily. Protected from what? Or from whom? Apparently, Michael could see the question on my face. He opened the folder. Inside were copies of financial records, meeting notes, letters, documents I had never seen before. Then he asked a question. "When did your son first start asking detailed questions about your finances?" My stomach tightened immediately. I told him. About the conversations. About the property discussions. About the real estate agent. About the basement lock. About the paperwork. As I spoke, Michael became increasingly serious. Not shocked. Not surprised. Serious. As though everything I was describing confirmed something he already knew. When I finally finished, he leaned back in his chair. Then he said something I will never forget. "Robert suspected this would happen." The room felt smaller. "What do you mean?" Michael folded his hands. "Several times during the last year, your husband expressed concern that certain family members were becoming unusually interested in his assets." Assets. I hated that word. To me, it was our life. To them, apparently, it was inventory. Michael continued. He never accused anyone of wrongdoing. But he was concerned enough to begin making preparations. Preparations. I suddenly remembered the revised wills in the attic. The notes. The warnings. Everything was starting to connect. Then Michael handed me a document. At first glance it looked ordinary. But one sentence caught my attention immediately. Beneficiary designation. I looked closer. My name appeared on the page. Only my name. No Ethan. No Vanessa. Just Margaret Dawson. My heartbeat quickened. "What is this?" Michael gave a small smile. "This is one of several documents your husband updated." Several. Not one. Several. For the first time since Robert died, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief. Not happiness. Certainty. Robert had known something was wrong, and he hadn't ignored it. The meeting lasted almost 2 hours. During that time, Michael revealed more than I thought possible. Not accusations. Facts. Timelines. Documents. Records. Patterns. Enough to paint a picture that deeply disturbed me. Several months before his death, Robert had become concerned after repeated conversations about transferring assets. Questions kept appearing. Questions that didn't make sense. Questions that seemed focused on ownership rather than care. Michael explained that Robert had deliberately created safeguards. Legal safeguards. Financial safeguards. Protections that would activate if certain events occurred. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. For 47 years, I had known my husband as a patient, gentle man. Yet quietly, behind the scenes, he had been preparing for a battle he hoped would never happen. As our meeting came to an end, Michael closed the folder. Then he slid one final envelope across the table. Unlike everything else, this envelope was sealed. My name was written on the front, in Robert's handwriting. My hands trembled. "When did he write this?" I asked. 6 weeks before he passed away." I couldn't speak. Michael waited. Then he added quietly, "He instructed me to give it to you only if you came to me with concerns about Ethan and Vanessa." The room fell silent. I stared at the envelope. 6 weeks. Robert had known. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to leave warnings. Enough to leave instructions. Enough to protect me. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten letter. Only one page. At the top was a sentence that instantly brought tears to my eyes. "My dearest Margaret." I took a deep breath and continued reading. Then I reached a paragraph that made my blood run cold. Because Robert named the one thing Ethan and Vanessa were desperately trying to find. Something they believed no longer existed. Something worth far more than the house. And according to Robert's letter, they had no idea where it was. I sat in Michael Reed's office holding Robert's letter with trembling hands. The words blurred for a moment. Not because the handwriting was difficult to read. Because it was his handwriting. The same handwriting I had seen on birthday cards. Anniversary notes. Shopping lists left on the refrigerator. For a brief second, it felt as if Robert were sitting beside me again, talking to me one last time. I took a deep breath and continued reading. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, Then my fears were justified. I prayed they never would be. My chest tightened. Robert wasn't a dramatic man. He never exaggerated. If he wrote those words, he meant every one of them. The letter continued. He explained that during the last year of his life, he had noticed a growing pattern. Not one incident. Not two. A pattern. Questions about ownership. Questions about inheritance. Questions about accounts. Questions about what would happen after he was gone. At first, he assumed the questions came from concern. Eventually, he wasn't so sure. I felt sick. Because I remembered those conversations too. At the time, they seemed harmless. Now they felt calculated. Every page of the letter revealed another piece of the truth. Robert never accused Ethan directly. That was not who he was. But he documented everything. Dates, meetings, conversations, financial inquiries. Each one carefully recorded. The deeper I read, the more I understood something painful. My husband had been carrying this burden alone, protecting me without telling me, trying to preserve peace in the family while quietly preparing for the worst. Then I reached the section Michael had warned me about. The section concerning the asset Ethan and Vanessa were desperately trying to locate. Robert described it simply. The reserve account. I frowned. Reserve account? I had never heard that term before. Michael noticed my confusion. Keep reading, he said quietly. So I did. Robert explained that decades earlier, during the growth of his business investments, he established a separate financial structure. Legal, documented, completely legitimate, but intentionally private. Very few people knew it existed. Even fewer knew where it was held. According to the letter, the account had grown steadily for years, far beyond what Ethan and Vanessa believed remained, far beyond the value of the house. My heart began pounding. I looked up at Michael. Are you telling me they knew about this? He nodded slowly. Not exactly. That answer surprised me. Michael folded his hands. They suspected something existed. They just didn't know where. Suddenly, dozens of strange memories clicked into place. The questions, the pressure, the financial curiosity, the discussions about transferring assets. The house had never been the entire goal. It was simply the part they could see. The reserve account was what they were searching for, and according to Robert's letter, they never found it. I continued reading. Near the end of the letter, Robert revealed the reason he had contacted Michael. Months before his death, he updated multiple legal protections, additional beneficiary documents, additional safeguards, additional instructions, every step designed for one purpose: protecting me, not controlling Ethan, not punishing anyone, protecting me. That distinction mattered. It sounded exactly like Robert. Even while preparing for betrayal, he wasn't seeking revenge. He was seeking security. The meeting lasted another hour. Michael carefully walked me through the documents. Some of the legal details were complicated, but one fact became crystal clear. The house was not the center of Robert's estate. Not even close. The people trying to pressure me had focused on the wrong target, and they didn't even know it. For the first time in weeks, I felt something unexpected. Not happiness, not satisfaction. Control. A small piece of control returning. Then Michael handed me another document. This one changed everything. I stared at the page. Beneficiary designation. Account ownership. Transfer instructions. Every line led to the same conclusion. Only one person had direct access. Only one name appeared repeatedly. Mine. Margaret Dawson. I looked at Michael. There has to be a mistake. There isn't. The room became silent. I wasn't a wealthy businesswoman. I wasn't a financial expert. I was a 72-year-old widow who still cried when she found one of her husband's old shirts in the closet. Yet somehow, Robert had arranged everything so that I would remain protected, even after he was gone. As the meeting ended, Michael gave me one final piece of advice. Do nothing yet. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Don't confront them. That surprised me. He must have seen it on my face. They believe you're vulnerable. I didn't answer. They believe you're confused. Still, I remained silent. And they believe they've already won. Those words lingered. Because he was right. At home, Ethan and Vanessa were acting like owners already. Discussing renovations. Planning sales. Changing locks. Making decisions. All before a single legal transfer had happened. They believed the future belonged to them. Michael stood and gathered the files. Then he looked directly at me. What happens next depends entirely on them. That sentence stayed with me all the way home. When I pulled into the driveway, I immediately noticed something different. A moving company truck was parked in front of the house. Two workers were carrying boxes out the front door. My front door. I stepped out of the car, confused, alarmed. Then I saw Vanessa standing on the porch with a clipboard in her hand, smiling, giving instructions, as though she owned the place. I walked toward the house. One of the movers passed me carrying a box labeled in black marker, Margaret's belongings. And in that moment, I realized they had already started moving me out. Without even asking, I stood frozen in the driveway. A mover walked past me carrying another box. Then another. Then another. Each one had the same label, Margaret's belongings. For a moment, I honestly wondered if I had stepped into someone else's life. This couldn't be happening. Not in my home. Not less than 2 weeks after Robert's funeral. Yet there it was. My furniture. My keepsakes. My memories. Being packed into boxes by strangers. And the person directing everything was my daughter-in-law. Vanessa stood on the porch holding a clipboard. She looked more comfortable than I had seen her in months. Confident. Relaxed. In charge. When she noticed me, she smiled. "You're home." I looked past her toward the open front door. "What is this?" Her smile didn't change. "We're getting organized." Organized. That was the word she chose. Not moving. Not removing. Not packing up my life. Organized. I walked past her into the house. The sight nearly took my breath away. Family photographs had disappeared from the walls. Decorations were gone. Boxes lined the hallway. Several rooms looked half empty. The house no longer felt like my home. It felt like a property being prepared for sale. Suddenly, Ethan appeared. His expression told me he knew exactly how this looked. "Mom, just hear us out." I laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because hearing those words while strangers packed my belongings felt absurd. Hear what out? Neither of them answered immediately. That silence said enough. Finally, Vanessa spoke. "We think it's time to discuss your future." There it was again. My future. Everyone seemed interested in discussing my future except me. I folded my arms. "What about it?" Vanessa exchanged a quick glance with Ethan. Then she handed me a brochure. I stared at the cover. Senior Living Community. For several seconds I couldn't speak. I simply looked at the brochure. Then at her. Then at Ethan. Nobody looked embarrassed. Nobody looked ashamed. Vanessa pointed at a photograph on the front. A smiling elderly couple walking through a garden. "We toured this place last week." Last week. Before Robert had even been buried. The realization hit me like a punch. While I was planning a funeral, they were planning my relocation. I slowly turned toward Ethan. "You toured retirement communities?" His eyes dropped to the floor. That hurt more than if he had argued. Because silence often tells the truth. Vanessa stepped forward. "It's actually very nice. Very nice." I wanted to scream. Instead, I remained calm. Perhaps calmer than they expected. Because something had changed inside me since meeting Michael. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't guessing anymore. I knew Robert had prepared for this. And that knowledge gave me patience. So I simply nodded. "I see." Both of them looked surprised. Almost disappointed. I think they expected tears. Anger. Resistance. Instead, I gave them none of it. That evening, I sat alone in my bedroom reviewing everything Michael had shown me. Every document. Every note. Every instruction. The more I read, the clearer the picture became. Ethan and Vanessa believed I was trapped. Dependent. Alone. But they were operating with incomplete information. Dangerously incomplete information. The next morning, another humiliation arrived. This time disguised as kindness. Vanessa placed a printed budget on the kitchen table. A budget. For me. She sat beside it like a financial advisor preparing for a meeting. I stared at the pages. Monthly spending limits. Recommended expenses. Suggested reductions. I felt my face grow warm. I had helped manage household finances for decades. I had balanced budgets before Vanessa graduated high school. Yet here she was explaining money to me like I was a child. "We just want to make sure you're comfortable." Comfortable. The words sounded insulting. Especially when attached to spending restrictions. Then came the worst part. A highlighted section. Transportation. Vehicle expenses. I looked closer. The recommendation was simple. Sell Margaret's vehicle. I stared at the page. Then I looked at Ethan. "My car." He shifted uncomfortably. "We don't think you'll need it much." Need it. The car Robert and I purchased together. The car I drove every week. The car that still carried his sunglasses in the glove compartment. Apparently, I no longer needed it. The humiliation burned. But once again, I remained calm. Every day, they became more confident. Every day, they revealed more. And every day, I learned something useful. 3 nights later, Vanessa announced a family dinner. Not unusual. At least that's what she claimed. Just a small gathering. A chance to relax. A chance to move forward. Move forward. Another phrase I had grown tired of hearing. Still, I agreed. By now I understood something important. People reveal the most when they think they've already won. The dinner took place on Saturday evening. Several relatives attended. A few family friends. Everyone seemed cheerful. Too cheerful. The atmosphere felt strange. Like a celebration nobody wanted to explain. Halfway through the meal, Vanessa stood and tapped her glass. The room became quiet. She smiled, then raised her wine glass. To new beginnings. The guests applauded politely. I watched Ethan. He looked nervous. Very nervous. Then Vanessa continued speaking. And what she said next made several people around the table visibly uncomfortable. Sometimes change is difficult, but it's necessary. The room remained silent. Nobody knew where she was going with this. I did. Then she turned toward me, still smiling, and placed a folder directly in front of my plate. The same kind of folder I had seen before. Legal documents. Prepared documents. Waiting documents. My pulse slowed. Not sped up. Slowed. Because at that exact moment, I knew the game was almost over. Vanessa pushed the folder closer. All we need is your signature. The entire table looked toward me. Waiting. Watching. Believing they already knew what would happen next. What none of them realized was that earlier that afternoon, Michael Reed had called me. And the information he shared changed everything. I looked down at the folder, then slowly smiled for the first time in weeks. And that smile immediately wiped the confidence from Vanessa's face. The smile disappeared from Vanessa's face almost. Instantly. Just seconds earlier, she had looked completely confident. Certain. Victorious. Now she looked nervous. Across the table, Ethan shifted in his chair. I could see it happening. The first crack. The first moment of doubt. The family dinner suddenly felt very different. Nobody was talking. Nobody was eating. Everyone was staring at the folder in front of me. Waiting. Expecting. Vanessa finally broke the silence. Is there a problem? I looked down at the papers. Then back at her. No. The room relaxed slightly. Then I added. The problem was solved this afternoon. Nobody understood what I meant. Not yet. I carefully closed the folder. Without signing a single page. Vanessa's smile disappeared completely. What are you doing? I folded my hands. Not signing. The silence that followed felt enormous. Ethan spoke next. His voice sounded strained. Mom, we've already discussed this. No, I replied calmly. You discussed it. I listened. Several relatives exchanged uncomfortable looks. The atmosphere in the room shifted immediately. For weeks, Ethan and Vanessa had controlled every conversation. Every decision, every plan. For the first time, that control was slipping away. Vanessa leaned forward. You don't understand the legal situation. I almost laughed. If only she knew. Instead, I simply said, I understand much more than you think. That was when the front door opened. Every head turned. A few seconds later, Michael Reed entered the dining room. The expression on Vanessa's face was priceless. Pure confusion. Pure panic. She had never seen him before. But Ethan had, and judging by the color draining from his face, he immediately recognized the danger. Michael greeted everyone politely. Then he sat beside me. No drama. No raised voices. No threats. Just quiet confidence. The kind Robert always respected. The room remained silent. Finally, Michael opened a leather folder. I apologize for interrupting dinner. Nobody answered. He continued. But there are several misunderstandings that need to be corrected. Misunderstandings. The word was perfect. Because everything Ethan and Vanessa believed was built on misunderstandings. They believed the house would soon belong to them. It wouldn't. They believed Margaret Dawson was financially dependent. She wasn't. And most importantly, they believed they had already won. They hadn't. Michael calmly reviewed several legal documents. No one interrupted. No one could. Every paper carried signatures, dates, witnesses, verification. Facts are difficult to argue with, especially when they're documented. As Michael explained Robert's estate plan, I watched Ethan closely. His confidence faded with every sentence. The house wasn't being transferred. The property wasn't available for sale. The authority they assumed they had simply didn't exist. Vanessa tried to interrupt twice. Michael politely stopped her both times. Then he presented the final document, the one Robert had prepared months before his death. The room became completely silent. beneficiary designation, account ownership, asset protection instructions. Every line pointed to the same conclusion. The primary beneficiary was not Ethan, not Vanessa, me, Margaret Dawson. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The realization settled over the room like a storm cloud. Then came the question everyone was secretly asking. What about the reserve account? Michael answered that too. The account existed. It was secure. It remained untouched. And Robert had arranged everything exactly as he intended. Vanessa looked stunned, almost speechless. The woman who always had an answer suddenly had none. Then Ethan finally spoke. Mom. His voice sounded small. Very small. I looked at him. For the first time in weeks, he looked less like a man making plans and more like a frightened little boy. But some damage cannot be undone. Some words cannot be unsaid. Some betrayals cannot be unseen. I never wanted this, he said quietly. The sentence hung in the air. I thought about answering immediately. Instead, I remembered something Robert once told me. When people show you who they are, believe what they do, not what they say. So I thought about actions. The secret meetings. The moving boxes. The retirement brochures. The property discussions. The signatures. The pressure. The lies. Then I finally answered. You may not have wanted this ending. The room fell silent again. But you wanted everything that led to it. No one had a response. Not even Ethan. The dinner ended shortly afterward. Guests left quietly, one by one. Nobody wanted to stay. Nobody wanted to witness what remained. Later that evening, after the house was finally quiet, I walked onto the back porch. The same porch where Robert and I had spent countless evenings together. The same porch swing. The same view. The same sunset. For the first time since his funeral, I felt peace. Not because I had won. This was never about winning. It was about surviving. It was about honoring the life Robert and I built together. A life measured not in bank accounts or property values, but in loyalty, trust, love, the things that truly mattered. I pulled Robert's final letter from my pocket and read the last sentence one more time. The sentence I hadn't fully understood until now. Take care of yourself, Margaret. You've spent a lifetime taking care of everyone else. Tears filled my eyes. But this time, they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of gratitude. Because even after he was gone, Robert had protected me one final time. And as the sun disappeared beyond the trees, I whispered the words I wished I could say to him one last time. Thank you. The evening breeze moved gently across the porch. And somehow, for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel alone. The end. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories about family, resilience, and finding strength when life feels impossible. And before you go, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if your own family treated you this way? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.